As the year 2020 turns into 2021, it sort of feels like we're in this space between what just happened and what's next. On social media on New Year's Eve, I noticed that the consensus opinion was that everyone is glad that 2020 is over. I mean, sure, there were some interesting things and some positive things that happened in 2020 because of the global pandemic, but most of us feel like it was a really, really tough and weird year. And I also noticed that there's a lot of presumption that 2021 has got to be much better. It's gonna be much better. It has to be. But we're still in between the beginning and the ending of the COVID pandemic. We're not quite to the end of it yet. We're filled with uncertainty about when and if vaccines will remove restrictions and allow us to reconnect with each other. We're sort of in the beginning and ending of presidential tenures in office, and there's a lot of questions about what that will end and what that will begin. And we're in between the ending and the beginning of some major social transformations that have been sort of unleashed in the last year, but still are unresolved. And this church is still in between a year of turmoil and challenge and some painful changes, but yet feeling like we're on the verge of optimistic hope for our future and some new beginnings. So the term that is used to describe this kind of state of feeling in between is limbo. That's a term that some people use, limbo. Have you heard of that term before? Well, it comes from the Latin term for edge or boundary, and maybe you know it as a religious term. Beginning with the medieval Catholic Church, it described a midpoint between earth and the afterlife, where at least some of the deceased would continue to work out their eternal salvation and dictate which direction they were going to go, up or down. In the Caribbean, it is a dance that maybe you have remembered from your childhood or even done recently, where you're literally bending over backwards to get from one side of the pole to the other. And all those seem to apply. I mean, right now we're sort of in limbo, on the edge or boundary of two unique moments of time, and it feels like we're having to bend over backwards and contort ourselves in all sorts of unfamiliar and uncomfortable positions just to get across that boundary. So the question is, what should you be doing? What should I be doing? Or what should we be thinking about if we're in this sort of state of transition, at least from one year to the next? Well, you feel like you ought to be thoughtful and wise. You ought to take some time to sort of think things through. But I don't know about you, at the same time, it feels like events really aren't slowing down. There's a new time in history that is upon us, and it requires some quick decisions. We need to kind of work through now how we're going to be and how we're going to respond. Whatever there is to learn and apply is going to have to be worked through now, because the next moment may, in fact, be too late. Things are moving so fast. You see, adapting isn't necessarily changing. Adapting isn't necessarily changing. It's actually preserving that which is worth saving and standing up for it by responding to new circumstances and applying it in new ways, applying those values that need to continue in new ways so that they will endure. As we read through the book of Daniel, we will see him and his friends constantly adapting their commitment to God, not changing their commitment to God, but adapting it to the demands of the moment. And we also find that as they do this, God is right there with them. You see, it's my experience that we humans tend to assume we are less adaptable than we actually are, than we were actually made to be. That we can overcome the toughest obstacles with just a sliver of hope or a single decision to act, or the smallest fragment of belief, even faith as small as a mustard seed, as Jesus put it. How many times have you used the word never or always this week in trying to convince yourself that something was the only way to go? How many times have you locked onto an assumed outcome and automatically found reasons to argue against any other possibilities for what might happen? You just are set that this is the way it's going to be. We avoid adapting because it's hard. It is hard work to adapt. It requires hard thoughts, it requires hard choices, and most of all, it requires some hard changes in how we do something. Like Daniel and his friends, we have to enter into a place of some risk, and we have to figure out how we're going to stand strong in what we believe, but do it in a new environment and sometimes with different rules. You know, I see a lot of that happening right now. And frankly, it's a little worrisome to me. It's concerning me. Getting through the next few months, I believe, is going to take a lot of adaptation and making even some long-term changes in behaviors and opinions so that we can continue to be the people that we are called to be, that we have been God's gracious enough to given us the ability to be these kinds of people. I think that's going to be true in our society, and I think that that is true in the Christian church. But what I observe is there's a lot of people, Christians and churches included, who are adamant that their only option is to draw lines and to dig trenches and to lob attacks against other people instead of working together towards solutions that really require all of our efforts. After the terrible obstacles that were presented in verses 1 through 7, Daniel and his friends announced their intentions in verse 8 and again in all of their stories. They are going to look past their circumstances and their previous assumptions, and what they're going to do is they are going to seek God's will. And they're going to adapt to their circumstances so that they can continue to follow it. They're not going to play it safe, and they'll risk everything for the sake of gaining God's greater glory in their lives. And what they will find is God will join them in that adaptive reality and equip them to overcome. God will reveal his miraculous power to support them. God is going to come into their lives in a powerful, even supernatural way. And their faithfulness will not only benefit them, but it will continue to inspire beyond themselves for lifetimes, just as their stories inspire us today. My friends, there are forces and influences, I believe this very strongly, which are working hard to steal our identity in Christ this week. There is an effort to turn us from hopeful into helpless, from active into stagnant, from leaders into followers, and from faith into fear. These forces are doing this because they fear change too, and need your support to justify their own resistance or give them an opportunity to gain power for themselves by seizing a ripe chance at taking it away from you. But if you listen and if you look through your circumstances this week, just like Daniel and his friends did, you are always going to see God. You are always going to see Jesus beckoning you into a deeper experience of what he has always offered us. No matter the circumstances, no matter the times, no matter the struggles and the tragedies, Jesus has always met us with salvation and redemption and newness of life. It's just he hasn't always done it the same way. My friends, let's take a journey these next 6 weeks. Instead of being overcome, let's see God equip us and help us and empower us into becoming overcomers.